we co-opt this term resilience, which is one of my least favorite terms because of the way it's used. And what the word resilience means in medicine, in the way that it's communicated to our young doctors, is it's like, hey, you might have all this moral injury, and moral injury is you're forced to do things that you don't agree with. And that's like practicing in the capital S system, the parts of the capital S system that are corporate and the money makers that conflict with what we learn as the best thing to do for our patients. So you have that going on constantly around you, and they're like, listen, you need to be resilient, meaning you need to accept that's what's going on, put your head down. And that's bred into us as young doctors, that this is an important quality in a good doctor, this resilience concept. It's not that resilience needs to be just okay with what's going on around us and then being abdicated into our roles as the labor force of the medical system. It's more that we're flawed and the system is flawed, and we understand and appreciate all of the flaws in all of it as humans. We're doing this amazing art that is healing the sick, and that is imperfect. That's what leads to doctors that don't have good work-life balance and have a divorce rate that's much higher than the general population, and have suicide rate that's much higher than the general population. We put our doctors through a lot, and for good reason. You have to have training to do these really complex things. You want your doctors to be well trained, but there has to be a balance too, right? When you ask me about the system's contribution, that's what it does. From the very beginning, it puts this intense pressure on you. I'm working long hours and studying, and you watch that happen around you. It takes its toll mentally and physically.
Welcome to Life as a Patient Doctor. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Moss, navigating life as a patient and a medical doctor. Walk alongside me as I reflect on the challenges and triumphs and lessons I've learned undergoing medical education with invisible disabilities. Join me as I interview other doctors, students, and healthcare workers on their own journeys. Listen to their unique stories on how they balance their health while caring for others in the health profession. Hello, everyone. I am very excited to interview an attending physician that I actually met during my psychiatry residency orientation. I am interviewing Dr. Dahlem, who grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, and migrated to Chicago to attend Chicago Medical School and graduated in 2013. He completed his family medicine residency at Lutheran General Hospital. Next, he joined and co-owned a private primary care practice in Niles, Illinois, called Oak Mill Medical Associates. In the summer of 2024, he transitioned his practice to One Medical in Skokie, Illinois. After he graduated residency, he became involved with CMS, which is medical school, both as a lecturer and a site director for the M3 Family Medicine Clerkship. He became the education director for family medicine in 2020 and discipline chair of family medicine in 2022. He completed the American Academy of Family Practice program in 2023, particularly passionate about physician wellness and advocacy, as well as student physician mentorship. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Of course. I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey besides that bio, but tell me from your end.
Yes. I mean, I think I have a little bit of an atypical journey into medicine. I think one of the things I like to joke about with students, so I've read their applications, and so many of them had the realization they were going into medical school as a young child when they got their first doctor toy, and the parents have the picture of them as an infant with the fake stethoscope in their teddy bear or whatever. Definitely not me. I went to undergrad with the thought that I would be a bench scientist, and I really progressed through that idea. When I found out that I didn't like that very much, I had already been teaching the MCAT through my job at Kaplan for extra money in undergrad. I taught the SAT and I took the MCAT to make some more money doing that, and I was teaching the MCAT. And it was after then that I decided to consider medicine, or one of my roommates was going into medical school. So it was a left turn there at the end, and made it into Chicago Medical School. My girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife, had a job in Chicago right at undergrad, so matched up there. I went through my time at CMS having no clue what specialty. You're noticing a trend here. Until my third year, when I rotated in primary care, really fell in love with it. I'd seen doctors in my life before, but seeing it just from the patient standpoint, a young person, you don't really appreciate what it is to actually do that for a job, what it entails and stuff. And more than what I found out what it was, I found out what it wasn't. I had so many misconceptions about what primary care was. And, any students that are listening to this, it's a good lesson. Sometimes take with a grain of salt things that people tell you. This is all pre-Reddit and things that medical students use now and get a lot of their information and a lot of their misinformation from. So fell in love with primary care in my third year. I got more involved in family medicine and things at the school and really connected with the family medicine program at Lutheran. And that's where I ended up matching. And I think the reason I'm sitting here in front of you now is pick up the story there. I had a really tough time in residence. I'm a traditional student, meaning that I didn't take any time off from preschool all the way until I graduated from medical school and came into residency pretty burnt out on both ends. And that's not a good place to be because residency is a major grind. So I'm sure we'll get into it, but I had a really tough time in residency, and that feeling I had when I left there motivated me to help pay it forward with doctors and wellness as my career planted itself and I had some extra time. That's when I found the Leading Physician Wellbeing program through the American Academy of Family Practice. And really the last few years, I've been digging in and then doing the wellness parts of it. I've now lectured in several different family medicine and not just family medicine. You mentioned lectured to you as a psychiatrist and future psychiatrist, and I've done internal medicine as well. So several different residencies in a few different medical schools, and that's how I'm planting the seed and growing that aspect of my career in addition to my clinical career.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you know what? I liked what you said, not going against the grain. It seems to be a common thread that a lot of the people I'm interviewing path isn't the same as everyone. I think that's so important to show that there's not just one path in medicine. There's not just one path in life. And like you said, you weren't even going to do medicine. You were doing the science path. It's interesting, but you were tutoring for MCAS without doing the MCAT yourself.
No, I did take the MCAT. So in order to teach at Kaplan, you have to have taken the exam and scored a certain number on it. So I started with Kaplan. I've always been a particularly good test taker, and teaching has always been something I've been interested in. It was part of my thought process. And being a bench scientist, you get a PhD and do scientific inquiry. It made a lot of sense to teach the SAT. And my boss at Kaplan was like, "Hey, you're a biochem major. You should just go ahead and take the MCAT." I get quizzed 3 times per hour what teaching the SAT was. So I took the MCAT before having any desire to go to medical school, which is not typical. I think a lot of people go into the MCAT as like this feared thing. And for me, it was, I'm not bragging, but I took it. So I already had taken that when I decided to go to medical school, which is nice.
I think it's awesome. And so exactly what you said. It's so different, but that's part of your journey. And so unique. And it shows that there are people that are not good at tests. And just on the opposite spectrum, there are people that are really good at test taking. What I love is that you used that skill set that you have to say, how can I help others? How can I give back? Just like you've done now by bringing your struggles with residency and burnout for other students, residents, and physicians. Could you talk a little bit more about that challenge through residency that really inspired this path for wellness?
Yeah, became a resident. I was feeling pretty good about myself. I've been very fortunate in my life. I owe that all to my parents. I've never really wanted for anything. Just grew up very comfortable, not just financially, but grew up in a loving family with a brother and sister and mom and dad. And I think that one of the issues I had going in is that I had never truly faced adversity at that point in my life as a 26-year-old, and facing the adversity for the first time at that point in your life, having the skills to do that when you hadn't had it before, I lacked those. And I came into residency pretty good about myself. Like I'm pretty awesome. Now I'm a doctor. Most people think of what's tough about residency, and people struggle through residency for different reasons. Some people, it's the work hours, particularly if you have a family or something like that. Some people, it's the academic part, like learning the depth of the specialty you're going into. For me, it was more the social aspects. I've always been something of an introvert. At that time, I wouldn't necessarily describe myself that way. Now, in retrospect, I know how introverted I truly was. And you're confronted with this very interesting, atypical social situation that I was just not prepared for. And now looking back, I recognize that I had anxiety and depression, and combining that with the hard aspects of residency, the work hours, academic rigor, all those kinds of things just created a very bad soup for me. And I was anxious. I was depressed. At that point, I had no appreciation, in fact, negative appreciation. If you would have asked that young Dr. Dahlem, hey, what do you think about meditation? Or what do you think about yoga? I said, there's no way that stuff works on me. Now I've gotten into both of those, amongst other things. I've learned how much those could have helped me. So I went through with undiagnosed anxiety and depression, poorly managing a social situation. I had a failing marriage at that time. I got married during medical school. The girlfriend that I mentioned before, marriage failed. So it becomes a vicious cycle when it comes to marriage. If you're anxious and depressed in a kind of environment that's taking its toll on you, that comes through on the other end into your marriage. If your marriage is struggling, you take that with you to work, and it creates this vortex of emotional pain that really manifested in a lot of ways. By the end, even some mild suicidal ideation, definitely a lot of regret in my job choice. If you would have asked me at that time, I would have said I should have done anything else with medicine. And that makes me sad looking back, almost more so than recognized anxiety and depression. Depending on the statistics, anywhere from 25 to 40% of residents regret choosing medicine as your career. And what I'm doing now, that's one of my main focuses. I think there's a place for identifying and recognizing anxiety and depression. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm lecturing to residents and medical students, although I think sometimes helping unearth some of those things for them hopefully will help them, or at least allow them to feel comfortable seeking medical attention, and maybe those things will be diagnosed. But I think more my focus is, hey, I see you, and these feelings that you have, first of all, you're not alone in those feelings, and deep rooted reasons for those feelings that are in the system and in how you were trained to be a doctor. And I think hearing that in a formalized way, it's what helped me, and I hope will help young doctors feel like they can enter this profession with some tools to fight against some of the things that are set up against us. And with those tools, then they can live a happy life, try to avoid being all these negative statistics that we have. I think that's my mission.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and sharing that story. It's hard. And I love what you said. You're not alone. One of my motivators for doing this podcast is mentoring other individuals who are similarly struggled is that recognition that there are other people that have struggled and there are ways to get through it. And one of that is getting that emotional support, whether that's through coworker, a friend, a professional therapist, attending physician. That is amazing that you've been able to impart that for other individuals and students. You mentioned a system. Yes, I would love to hear more. I've definitely had a little bit of experience from the system, but hearing from your perspective that you've been in the system a little bit more, how has the system impacted medical students and residents?
Yeah, I'm pretty radicalized in this area at this point. I think that no matter where we feel about this topic, we can call it the capital S system. So that's like the hospital, lowercase s systems, practitioners. So that's not just doctors, but nurses and mid-level, so NPs and POs, all the way down to any staff member that interacts with patients, front desk staff, et cetera. The pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, the medical device companies, the pharmacies themselves, right? So all these things work together to be what would call the capital S system. You could have a whole lecture series as to what happened in the course of the years to get us to where we are now. But to keep it efficient, I think the way you think about it is, as you're a young doctor, growing up in the system. Your educational process is dictated by the system because medical schools are the hospital systems. And so not only are you becoming immediately indebted to them, like physically with like money and talking about a conflict of interest, very unique in what we do to our young doctors in terms of the level of debt that we put our young doctors in. But I think honestly, and maybe this is where my radicalization comes from. I think it's intentional, right? So if you're the system and you shackle the future doctors to you, but with debt, it takes a lot of their autonomy away. If you look at how money is generated through medicine, it's a labor force. So and the labor force are the doctors and the practitioners. What they do generates the money. And it's very similar to what we consider labor forces like police officers or coal miners or teachers, right? Where the money that's generated, there's no inventory, right? You have to keep the labor force in line. And this is what historically led to the development of unions. And by keeping the labor force in line, then you as the capitalist system have your hand on the reins. Doctors never unionized for probably some very complicated reasons that I don't even know all the history to. And no one feels bad for doctors. We're all doing fine. I'm very comfortable. I don't go home with coal soot in my lungs. I think that's part of it as well historically. But over time, doctors have ceded or control of the system to business people and corporate entities. I say all that to say that's the environment that you're being educated in. You have so little control as somebody who some of the most talented people we have in our society, right? We put them through intense academic rigor to get to where they are. There's a lot of delayed gratification. A lot of their friends, a lot of my friends, and engineering and stuff like that. I'm out of undergrad and start making some money while I'm spending money. And I'm working long hours and studying. And you watch that happen around you. It takes its toll mentally and physically. We put our doctors through a lot, and for good reason. You have to have training to do these really complex things. You want your doctors to be well trained, but there has to be a balance too, right? When you ask me about the system's contribution, that's what it does. From the very beginning, it puts this intense pressure on you. And then the last word I want to say about it is the co-opt this term resilience, which is one of my least favorite terms because of the way it's used. And what the word resilience means in medicine, in the way that it's communicated to our young doctors, is it's like, hey, you might have all this moral injury. And if you don't know what moral injury means, moral injury is basically like you're forced to do things that you don't agree with. And that's like practicing in the capital S system, the parts of the capital S system that are corporate and the money makers that conflict with what we learn as the best thing to do for our patients. So you have that going on constantly around you, and they're like, listen, you need to be resilient, meaning you need to accept that's what's going on, put your head down. And that's bred into us as young doctors, that this is an important quality in a good doctor, this resilience concept. And that's at the forefront when I lecture to residents. It's not that resilience needs to be just okay with what's going on around us and then being abdicated into our roles as the labor force of the medical system. It's more that we're flawed and the system is flawed, and we understand and appreciate all of the flaws in all of it as humans. We're doing this amazing art that is healing the sick. And that is an imperfect thing that historically has been reserved for leaders of society, and identifying those people and then putting them through the things that we put them through, right? That's what leads to doctors that don't have good work-life balance and have a divorce rate that's much higher than the general population, and have suicide rate that's much higher than the general population. And also that job regret, which I, again, think is one of the most telling and damning things about where we're at. You can't have a workforce that regrets doing the thing that they're doing. How many of my colleagues' parents were doctors? And then you expect me to go through what I've gone through now. My current wife's a doctor. I have two young kids, and genetics works the way genetics works. They might be talented intellectual people, and they might look to me and their mom to be like, hey, what could I do with this brain of mine? And I don't know if I would encourage them to do medicine if it stays the way it is. That's something that as a society, we should be worried about. You want your most talented people to be your healers. And that's something that historically has always been the case. And if you create something otherwise, there is danger in that.
Wow, thank you so much. The big capital S system. That is a really good explanation of it. You hit many of the big players going from insurance, hospital, everything, and how that can really put a sense of control on residents, on doctors, on practitioners, like you said. I'm interested, you said balance. Transitioning a little bit, I would love to hear from all your experience now. How do you strive to find balance in your own life, both as a doctor, as a husband, as a father? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. And so I'm glad you asked. This is really the key to my journey. Through my initiation into the wellness space, one of the things that I latched onto immediately was this concept of Ikigai, which is, for anybody that does not know, it is a balance concept where you're trying to equalize the pull of the things that you're good at, the things that you make money for, the things that society needs, and the things that you love to do. All four of those forces pull at you from different directions. And if one of those is pulling too hard, then you're out of balance. You want to recognize, first of all, where you are in that, if you're feeling out of balance, and then you can utilize whichever aspect is not pulling hard enough. You can invest in that side of things to try to achieve more balance. When I entered into my wellness journey, I wasn't doing enough with what I feel like the world needs, the medical community needs. By investing myself into the wellness space, I was able to pull harder on that aspect, getting paid for my job and doing the things that I love to do were pulling really hard, but I wasn't getting that pull what the world needs, what the medical community needs. It's put me more in balance doing that. There's a lot out there on Ikigai. I encourage anybody listening to look into it. It's a Japanese concept. In its true nature, it's been westernized, and there are publications that describe it in full and how to apply it to your life. A lot of times there's like a journaling aspect, just digging through where you're at and identifying which thread is not pulling hard enough, by answering specific questions. And once you identify that, then putting into practice with like small obtainable goals and noticing hopefully an improvement as you start to tug harder on that other aspect. I think this is something that all doctors need to hear because our jobs pull so hard at us. We have a profession that will take as much as we're willing to give. It's not like we can clock out at a certain time or put down the Excel spreadsheet. They'll just be sitting there the next day. People get sick at night and people get well over the course of multiple days. There's a longitudinal aspect to this whole thing, and you need to sign out, sign in, and it's all going on constantly. And that's on top of the fact that you can theoretically never know enough, right? Any time that you didn't have with patients, you could be spending learning more, right? And so at what point do you put a hard stop on that, balance it? I think that's something that's learned and that we should really be teaching medical students. Instead, we teach them that medicine needs to be your one true love and everything else is separate. And one of my great joys in being a mentor in my role at the medical school and talking to the next generation of young doctors, I include you in that. I feel like you all are doing so much better from the beginning at prioritizing other aspects of your lives other than just medicine. When I talk to the current, as we speak, this is the ERAS time for the fourth year. So I've met a lot in the last few weeks with fourth years choosing family medicine. It's so interesting to sit down with them and hear their stories on why they chose family medicine, what they're looking for in a residency, to hear them say, I want to live in a certain geographic area. And as one of the first things that comes out of their mouth, I want to make sure that I'm close to a loved one. In addition to my medical career, I think defining yourself as a person and then having be medicine what you do, like a job, like a profession. And it's not for everybody. People will take that. But for me, that was really important in being somebody else, like you mentioned, having the other things, being a father, being a husband, being a son, being a brother, being a fan of the Ohio State Buckeyes, and having that be me, and then having medicine be what I do, rather than have medicine be who I am. And I think that's something that we could teach earlier in medical school, but for whatever reason, I think it could go deep into that, why the younger generations are doing better at that already without a lot of effort from the top down. You guys are carving that space for you. And it gives me hope that there's a young generation of doctors coming up who appreciate the work-life balance and can apply that in a healthy way. Hopefully won't lose their balance in the way that doctors from my generation have done historically.
Such a good point. And it is interesting that Gen Z and millennial generation, because that's probably the majority of people in medical school, pre-med, and residency. I'm a millennial, but right after. It is interesting how we're coming up with this challenge that we've been told work life is important, but then we don't see it in our superiors or our mentors. So then we're at this like interesting, okay, what do we do? Do we do what I say, not what I do? And so growing up in that. And so we're like, okay, maybe we'll do it and not just talk about it. It is really cool for my generation, like really be some extent recognizing exactly what you said. We're not just a doctor, not just a medical student.
You brought something up I just wanted to highlight really quickly. You were talking about do what I say, not what I do. This is something that has been really concerning for me, watching how wellness is applied in residencies and medical schools. Anybody listening, calling this out is really important. There's this whole thing now because wellness is such a buzzword, right? And it's on the resident surveys where program directors don't get good scores. They look to, okay, how can I improve wellness? I call it miming wellness. Okay. So you just plaster wellness paraphernalia, bring somebody like me in and say, okay, you had a lecture on wellness, make sure you grade the residency. We're appreciating this thing. And it's accomplishing the opposite, in my opinion. You can't just do that. It has to be more, we have to look deeply inward at how we train our doctors from the beginning. And that's got to be more of what we focus on. I still think it's really important to educate and call out. I don't think those are useless things. We just have to be careful that they're not hollow, that they're good intention in the way. What I wanted to say about this leading up to the best example that I could have is I think sometimes people equate wellness to just like time off. And so it's just, okay, we're focusing on wellness because we're giving our residents more time off. And I just so fundamentally disagree with that. It's not about just giving people more time away from the hospital. There are some important aspects in that. It's important to look at that as a bigger piece of your residency and how it functions. But you can't just say, okay, we're doing a good job with wellness because we're just giving our residents more free time. Because first of all, that compromises education in the ways that we could describe. And I do think that's important. I want competent doctors to be coming out of residency to treat me and my family. So I do think that's important, but I don't think that creates more well doctors just having more free time. It has to be more entrenched in the education process.
That is such a good point. Thank you. I was going to ask you, what can programs do? But I think you answered that. But when you do these lectures, what do you normally recommend residents and medical students to do to actually emphasis on their wellness?
Yeah, I think when it comes to what can the residencies do, that's a little more complicated. I'm not sure I'm an expert on that because you have to look internally at how your residency functions, and that's going to be a very unique thing. So and something that I don't have any experience in. I haven't been a residency program director or anything like that. So I think I'd be speaking out of turn to say specifically what you have to do. I just don't think the answer is giving residents more time off. I think when it comes to what can medical students do, what can residents do, I think the first thing I think that you can do is be very comfortable being honest with yourself about how you feel. can be as formalized as psychotherapy. Every resident, really every person could benefit from some cognitive behavioral therapy. That's something I would recommend on the surface and potentially going even deeper with. I think shining a light on your balance, I think engaging people that you care about in your life, your family, your friends, listening to them, asking them honest questions about where they feel like you're at, and taking them on the ride with you. One of the greatest things about being a doctor is that everyone is interested in what you're doing constantly. Like there's so many, just look at how many medical shows are out there. Society is fascinated by what happens in medicine. So you can utilize that to your benefit, and people will be interested in what goes on all the time, but you balance that against taking your work home and that being your persona at all times. So finding a way to put up whatever barrier that you feel comfortable with. And that's going to be different for everybody. Some people want to have a little bit more of their definition as a person, be their job as a doctor. And I'm not saying that's not okay. I'm saying that being cognizant and intentional about where you draw that line and not having other people draw it for you is where I'm looking at defining it as. But I think making sure that you go into residency, and this is what I encourage students when I'm mentoring them, you want to do that before you enter into residency, because there's a really stark inflection point between becoming a student. The way that I like to think of it is that you go from being a pure student as a medical student to a student-employee. This is important because how you define your job at the hospital is very much that. You're both a student and an employee. It can also be looked at in the negative way because hospital systems like to have you be a student when they want you to be a student, for example, when they set your salary, or an employee when they want you to be an employee. Say, for example, if a global pandemic strikes and they need to have people on the front lines risking their lives, taking care of patients, then you're an employee and this is your duty, right? So there's two ways to look at that student employee term. But I think as you transition from a student to a student employee, that's an inflection point. I need to intentionally go into this with the thought process that I'm going to set these barriers. They have to be reasonable. You still have to invest in that student part of it, but do that in a way that's really comfortable. And what's great about fourth year of medical school, I think we have an opportunity to encourage that in students, because fourth year of medical school, your first 2 years, you're learning the language of medicine, you're doing the hard sciences, pharmacology, histology, all that kind of stuff. And then you go into your third year and you put all that into practice, find out what you want to do for a living, learn these clinical skills. Fourth year, there's time to continue to build your clinical skills. And you have this whole other aspect where you're filling out your application and showcasing yourself. There's this great opportunity because there's more free time in fourth year. Finally, for a lot of people, especially non-traditional students that went through a rigorous undergrad and their first 2 years of medical school, and then the third year, like I mentioned, it's an opportunity to take a breath. Be like, okay, I'm in my mid-20s. Who am I? Who I want to be? Is there some aspect of this that I could invest more into? And you have the opportunity to do that before then you become a resident, so that you feel more comfortable with where you want to put up your wall, but also being free and honest with yourself. It's not a permanent thing that you have to do. You can have different loves and interests that come up later in life. Young people are that you're not your set person in your 20s. Especially not anymore. And so you have to allow yourself really to grow. And as you add things in, where does this fit in my life next to medicine? And just constantly being cognizant of that. And then I think lastly, just being really cognizant of that term resilience and using it in the healthy way and not the unhealthy way, like I mentioned before. The healthy way being, hey, I'm imperfect. The system isn't perfect, and I'm going to make mistakes. That's part of the learning process. And I need to learn from those and internalize feedback in a positive way. All those kinds of things, right? As a positive form of resilience, rather than, hey, I just need to be okay with all these things that are going on around me because I put my head down and take care of patients, remove brain tumors or whatever I'm set to do. And I have no ability to comment on this administrative thing that's going on, or this rule of should we be allowing insurance companies to dictate this part of the system or whatever. Like those are going on over your head, but we have the power. We are the ones that learn medicine. We are the labor force to be able to dictate that. We have to project our voice into that space and not allow them to just tamper us down and be like, you know what, you just practice your medicine. We'll take care of the administrative stuff. So get involved in committees, care about those things, and speak truth to power. Sometimes it's just as simple as feeling like you have the safety to say to somebody above you, hey, I'm uncomfortable with how this is going, and this needs to change in this way, and go about functional change. It's not just complaining. That's not what I mean, but it's coming up with the functional change on your own accord and not letting somebody with, frankly, a business degree tell you how to practice medicine.
Thank you. Oh, I love that. Those are really tangible things to do, like separating persona. You talked about also the fourth year time period that you have this time to take a breath, like that, and reflect and get into therapy or get into connecting back with family or friends that you haven't talked to for 3, 4 years for the medicine. So it is important for all those fourth years about to go through residency. Please take advantage of that. It is so meaningful, but it's also very easy to start stressing out. Should I start studying for step 3? Should I do research? I am talking mostly to myself because I created this podcast during my fourth year medical school. So it was part reflection, parts not relaxing, which I should have kind of did. But anyway, as we finish up, you cited so many amazing things. But are there any final pearls of wisdom that you want to leave the audience with?
Oh boy, if anybody listening to this, whether or not you're in medicine, you're out the other end of it, or even if you're just interested in what those medical folks are talking about, I think the pearl of wisdom I would give is corporations and government, these big picture entities going on around you all the time. We can either allow them their own course. We are just subject to whatever they decide and live in that world dictated solely by them, or we have to take our little piece of that each of us individually have and say, I'm going to guide this future in the way that I have the ability to. What I mean by that is obviously each one of us individually doesn't have an ability to change the medical system, right? And so as a result of that, each of us individually could feel really powerless. But the power comes in the community. The power comes in numbers. If 1 becomes 10, becomes 100, becomes 1,000, now you are tugging strong enough to where corporate entities and government have to listen. And that's the grassroots part of this whole wellness space that I would love to get more involved with and I plan to get more involved with as my career goes on. But it doesn't take you being a wellness advocate to do that. It could be as simple as this probably is going to be on the internet forever. This is 2024 going into a major election cycle, for example. And so vote, that's a great example of utilizing the thread that you have as a person. You live in a democracy where you can pull it the way that you want to. And if enough people pull it the way that we want to, but we know from a lot of this is that there's a feeling of hopelessness that leads to inaction. How I would end is simply to try to galvanize anybody that wants to make a change. The system that you're in is small or as large of a change as that is. And I could use words like unionization and stuff like that. Again, that's above my pay grade. So I should stay in my lane, although I do think that would be great, by the way. If we just consider it a concept of doctors coming together and saying to power, listen, this is how it should be, not only for our benefit as doctors. It's not about that. It's about if you go into the ER, if I go into the ER, say tonight I have appendicitis and I go into the emergency room, what the hospital system would want me to believe is, hey, we've got the smartest surgeon, the hardest working surgeon in there. That's why you came here, and that's why you're going to come out the other end of this as good as can be. Thank you for your money. What's lost in that is, what if my surgeon is going through a divorce? What if they aren't doing well mentally? Those aspects could supersede any skill level that person could potentially have or any intelligence, right, that they could potentially have. You could be the most rested, the most intelligent doctor out there. But if you are sick mentally, you can make mistakes. You can hurt people in the same way that if you were incompetent or if you were fatigued. The competency and the fatigue part are what we've focused on in medicine so much. And I'm not saying those aren't important. Those are very important things. But what hospital systems need to learn to appreciate, and it might take us to tell them, is that you need well doctors, because if what you care about is your bottom line, this is going to impact your bottom line in as much as the other aspects that you've proven to care about already. Find some like-minded individuals in your institution, form a committee, get a voice to the next level above you to hope to start the ball rolling. It's just that inertia, right? Try to slowly fight that inertia to get your voice as high as possible to institute the change that you want and to not feel powerless. They need us, okay? Because we are a labor force. They cannot make money without us. And so they need us. They need to listen to us. They know that they need to listen to us. And so I think to leave everybody.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yes, exactly like you said, there's no medicine, no treatment without the labor force, without the doctors, without the nurses. There is power to that. So use that power in whatever way you can. I'm going to use that as a call to action. If you agree with showing that there is humanity in medicine, this is where we have advocacy groups like Docs with Disability, like this podcast. There are so many, a lot of different medical student run organizations or residency organizations that are, like you said, grassroots, trying to get the word out there for wellness, for how it can we better improve the system, union. There's so many different things. So look what's available at your medical school, at your residency, or just start talking to your friends and build something if you can't find it. I love what you said of powers and numbers. It is so important. And I guarantee if you're struggling with something, there is at least one other person that's silent and she's scared to say something.
Since I could say there's a large amount of people feeling the same way, right?
Yes. Literally, as we were starting residency, I started noticing I was always asking questions. And I took my work to the side. I was like, come on, everyone. Why am I the only one asking questions? I can't be the only one questioning. I love the response of one of my co-residents. He's like, no, you're just saying everything that we're thinking inside. So haven't gotten the confidence yet to do it. And I was like, okay, that makes more sense. I'm here for you. Let's do it. Let's ask the questions. So you can do it. Dr. Dahlem, how can medical students, residents, or other individuals get in contact with you if they want to learn more from you? Do you want to share that contact information?
Yeah, definitely. I think the easiest way is just my email. It's my last name, DAHLEMMD@gmail.com. If you would like to have me get involved with your residents, whatever, be a lecture, that kind of thing, and just reach out. Even if you're just an individual student and you want to chat about what's going on in your situation or want some guidance, the mentorship aspect of this is the part I care about the most. So I'd love to hear from anybody and everybody that has thought.
Amazing. Thank you. And I always like to just end with a quick summary. You start off by saying that you came into science, not originally thinking about medicine. And instead, you were just doing what you were good at, taking tests, helping others with tests. And that kind of started to inspire you, like maybe I can also do medicine. And you started going in that path. You went straight through, no gap year, full speed ahead, all the way to residency. You even found primary care and found your passion in that. But when you actually got to residency, you started to struggle emotionally. Everything was coming down of not just the academics, the work hours, but really learning that you haven't taken the time to take care of your own mental and physical health. And what after you completed residency, you had the opportunity to look back and see how can I improve not just for myself, but help the people behind me and people in medicine. Because this is a concept that matters to me and I want to do something. You talked about the Ikigai, Ikigai.
Ikigai. Yeah.
I will make sure I put a link to it because it's so interesting. How to have that balance of personal identity what society needs personally, and try to find that balance. Make sure that you're not fully focused on one, but you do a little bit of what matters to you and what matters to society. And either through journaling, get small attainable goals, but also recognizing that it takes time. It's not something that's just going to happen overnight. We also talked about learning about the capital S system and how you're not the only one. If you're struggling, it's not just because you're not good enough or not smart enough, but that is just part of education for years for the doctors and students to have less autonomy so we can be there. That's just how it's come. And so it's really important to look at yourself, look at the organization you're for. You have to have voice. And you do have a voice. It's important to get with other individuals and use the power of voice to share what's not working and what would work instead of just taking what they say is wellness, but having ideas. You provided some great ideas for medical students and residents of setting boundaries, listening to yourself of what you feel, listening to the people that care about you and see what they see in you, learning how to develop positive or a healthy resilience, learning that we are all imperfect, we are all humans, mistakes can happen. Problems can happen. That doesn't mean that you're not a good doctor and not a good student. It means that you're human and in the process of learning. So thank you, Dr. Dahlam, so much. If this is the first time that you listen to the podcast of Life as a Patient Doctor, I hope you subscribe wherever you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you are. You can follow me on social media at MedPsychMoss. You can find on my website, MedPsychMoss, a lot of where I've written about my own personal struggles in medicine with the system, where you can read my blog and how I've found I would give back by sharing from my experience and sharing strategies that I hope will help you. So thank you, Dr. Dahlem, so much. And I hope to see you all next time. Take care.
Thanks, Tiffany.